I am really excited to welcome Bill Hefferman to the Leadership Puzzle today. Bill is a leadership consultant and probably the smartest organizational development expert that I know, and have had the opportunity to work with him while at Intel Corporation before he went off to work at Ernst & Young, and he's now running his own agency. His passion is mental wellness, but more specifically around the topics of resilience and adaptability, which are really critical skills for every leader to know in this day and age. Bill, thanks for joining me today.
I'm just super happy to be here, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh,
Looking forward to
uh,
the conversation.
I've been excited about our conversation, I'd like to start having our talk around kind of the macro trends of employee or leader mental health. I was when I was doing some research, I came across a McKinsey Health Institute survey where they used the term holistic health, and they kind of had a broad encompassing mental, physical, social, and spiritual health.
Right.
The survey is interesting. 30,000 employees across 30 countries, and they found that employees who had positive work experiences reported better holistic health,
Right.
with more innovation, better work, and improved job performance than those who had a less positive work experience. What's your take?
I my take is that I think that's all correct, and that there's a reason for it, a neuroanatomical reason at a very base level for that. And I think that the the trend over the last since the beginning of the pandemic, the trend towards an erosion of our mental well-being and our overall well-being in the workplace has been exacerbated during that time, and there's some thoughts about why that that it's that way. And it has to do with. So let's talk first to the um, when this findings that when people are doing well, at work, etc., that there's a strong connection to physical well-being, social well-being, and it's all interconnected. And my understanding of that from a neurological perspective or a neuroanatomical level is, if you think of our autonomic nervous system, and that's our it's our automatic nervous system. It's the connection between our brain and our body and our organs.
Okay.
And when that's all working well, we're in what's known as ventral vagal, this vagus nerve, this large nerve that innervates all our organs. When we're feeling good and connected and feeling grateful and motivated, etc., in a healthy, motivating workplace, connected with one another, then our nervous system and our organ systems and our whole physiology just works much better. What happens though was that when we fall out of that optimal state and go down into fight flight, into that sympathetic nervous system, um, then our functioning is compromised, because when you get into that anger or anxiety or any sort of flavor of that, you shift out of being creative, collaborative, grateful, all that stuff, and you shift more into a protective survival mode. And you tend to see things in a more black and white fashion, etc. But at an anatomical level, what happens when you go into fight flight, when you feel a sense of threat, severe or mild, is that your digestion slows down or shuts down. And so that's why under toxic stress conditions, we hear all the time about how bad stress is for us. And that's not exactly true. It's more nuanced than that.
Right.
It's that when we don't handle stress very well, And when we exist in those stressed states, not responding well to it in a resilient fashion for a long time, then that really does compromise our health. And you can see it in this McKinsey study and all the rest of it.
Now,
Um,
so with that, I mean, you hear folks say, "Oh, well, I'm stress eating." I mean, you think that the byproduct of having that stress, people just naturally comfort themselves with doing something like eating or
well, it's sort of a negative, what we might think of as negative coping skills. So we have our ways of our systems. We've learned these ways of coping with stress. Now, some of us have learned, or and over time had the self-discipline and and the practice and developed the nice habits of exercising and getting sleep and eating well and really for
yeah,
paying attention to ourselves in a conscious way, and those are positive coping mechanisms. um, but it's also when, particularly when we go unconscious in that fight flight, stressed state of being, then we we lose our sort of overall mindfulness, and we start acting in those negative coping patterns that we've learned, that we've all grown up with over time.
got it.
Some people abuse, you know, junk food or alcohol, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Even to the point of even loneliness and seclusion, of pulling back and not engaging socially with people. Those are all negative coping mechanisms, and they definitely can lead over time to negative health outcomes, mental health
Yeah.
outcomes. And is that there's a role that leaders play in mediating that phenomenon. And there's some very specific things that leaders can and arguably should do to keep that workforce in that optimal state of functioning. And there's a price to pay when they don't, for themselves and for everyone.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and delve into that a little bit in terms of uh, the team, and then I want to kind of come back to the leader themselves. But you brought it up. So um, how can leaders cultivate resilience within their team to handle adversity, setbacks,
Right.
high pressure environments without compromising the team's well being?
Right. Well, so first of all, it does require that the leaders are really good at self-regulation, that they're very good at putting on their own oxygen mask first. So because you can't give what you don't got. So
Yeah.
you need to be resilient. And that comes because we all have, in these nervous systems, we have our nervous systems have this sensing capability. It's called neuroception, different than perception, which is more about your brain and your conscious thoughts. But we pick up on one another's vibes. There's
Hmm.
this emotional contagion that we pick up on. And so, you can feel it. And everybody here on this call can feel it. Like when somebody walks into a room and they're stressed out, and they're, you know, that you can see it in their face. They'll go with a flat affect. Oftentimes their voice will lower. They'll lose what's known as prosody, this sort of sing-song quality of our voice, and they'll go more flat and monotone. And um and so and then our own nervous systems pick up on that, and it puts us into fight flight. It puts us into self-protection mode. And when we go into that self-protection mode, we don't think creatively. We don't, all the bad stuff happens. And so as a leader, it's why it's so important as a leader to be able to have that personal excellence, and to be able to manage to be an expert operator of your own nervous system, and to be able to show up. And it doesn't mean always being happy or positive or grateful, or, sort of, la la. Um, because it's important, obviously, to be authentic at the same time. And if you're not feeling it, if you're feeling stress or whacked out or whatever, it's okay to show up and go, "Hey guys, I got to tell you, I've just heard some bad news, and I'm not feeling so great. So, but I just want to be real with you, and we'll work through it. We'll
Yeah.
work through it, and I have some ideas, but just to let you know that I'm not feeling at my best right now." And that just by itself can help people relax a little bit and not themselves get emotionally hijacked by that leader. So to stay in that zone of safety and connection, to stay in that optimal, what they call the frontal vagal zone, requires that we feel safe enough and connected enough to that leader, to our mission, to our teams, to one another, um, so that and when we feel safe enough and connected enough, then that can help us stay out of those doldrums of
Sure.
the super stress state.
So let's say an employee walks in. You're the leader. Employee walks in, and you just know that they're either pissed off or they're something's wrong, and they change
Yeah,
the atmosphere of the room immediately. We've all felt that. I mean, you just like, oh
yeah,
my gosh, what just happened? So as a leader, what's the best course of action for you to take in that particular moment?
right. Great question. So
Make a joke?
of course, well, so yeah, right. Um, yeah, make light of their concern. No, don't. Um, that so as a consultant, I reserve a certain number of it depends answers. So it depends. If obviously if it's a social situation where you have a team there and somebody walks in the room and you can feel their vibe, it's like, whoa, what's going on with Bob or Joe or Sue or whatever? That's what's going on with them. But it would be awkward or rude or to or and also maybe put them on the spot to call them out, in front of everyone. Um, and but there are things that you could do in that moment. You could say, "Hey, I'm sensing that I know that there's this news that we all heard, and if we could just get grounded here for a second, let's just all take a deep breath and just be here and just understand that we're a team. Whatever's going on, we're going to get through this together. But let's just before we launch into our discussion, let's just take just a moment and take a few deep breaths and slow deep breaths, and let's just get grounded here." So that's something you could do even in that kind of awkward social situation, just as off the top of my head. Um,
Well,
in
you
a
could
more
actually use that in even a normal setting,
yeah,
uh, to ensure that your team on an ongoing basis, so that when someone does come in, it won't be it won't seem odd if you go, "Hey guys, just feeling like today we need to, before we get started, let's take a few minutes. We're gonna breathe a little bit, center ourselves, and kind of get ready for the meeting."
right. And it could be also that you might have a team culture where or a team practice where when you start out the meeting, you start out with a just a 2 or 3 minute practice of connecting with one another and say something to the effect of, um, "Hey, I'm just curious if anyone would like to share something that's new or good for you, something great that happened today, or something that happened recently, or a win, or something." Let's just to set the tone, and so you can start out on that kind of sharing of news and goods
Yeah,
um, as well. But now, if you're in a private meeting, right? Somebody walks into your office or your cubicle, or probably more accurately, you fire up a Zoom call, and you can sense that something's going on. And I think that's where, as a leader, that's where empathy
mm,
comes in, and compassion, and to be able to now, ideally, you will have established a relationship of trust with that person before this interaction,
sure, sure.
right? Because if you don't have that fundamental level of trust, then it's going to be hard in the moment to get them to open up and to
Yeah,
share what's
for
going on.
sure. Yep.
Um, but again, uh, understanding that we only operate in our optimal fashion as humans when we feel safe and connected. And so as a leader, I think it's imperative for you to call out and just check in with somebody and go, "Hey, so how you doing? What's going on? You okay? Is anything you want to discuss?" Um, and And if they say, no, I'm good, you might probe maybe one more time. But you don't want to be, pushy. But at the same time, I think always having that, not being all task focused all the time, because ultimately when you're just task focused all the time and not relationship focused, you're going to sacrifice the task. You're going to
Yeah.
lose the task performance
Eventually, yeah.
by needling by pegging too hard on
Yeah.
that dimension.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because as I was preparing, I was thinking back on, the times when I was leading larger teams, and what I had no idea about mental wellness and resilience and mindfulness and all of that. But I remember routinely coming to the team. Like at Intel, we worked hard and played hard, but I would go a lot of times on a Friday, go about 3 o'clock to the team, say, "Come on, let's go down to the pub and let's just blow off some steam and have a social drink before we head off for the weekend," as a way to just help the team, blow off some steam.
Yeah.
Now that was easy in Portland in the summers because they were so delightful. Most folks, even if they felt like they were overworked, like, yeah, okay, let's go
Yeah.
enjoy the sun.
Okay. Who's tab? Are you buying, boss?
Exactly.
Um,
But that's probably harder now in such a remote or hybrid world.
I think so. I was thinking about this when I was thinking through this podcast in advance, and thinking about this whole topic of remote working and hybrid working. And you know how it is when you form a new team, and you and I have had this experience of being parts of international teams when we were working at Intel.
Yeah.
And there was always something, it was hard to get that team to do the forming, storming, norming, and performing, if you never got them together physically.
Right.
And so it was really, so even sometimes if you can just get people together at some point early on in the relationship, and periodically, where you're having that face to face contact, because there is something that's fundamentally different about that real human contact. Um, so that if I would emphasize that as a manager or leader, if it's possible in a remote work situation to periodically actually meet somebody, if you're in the same geographical location, to go out for lunch or coffee or dinner or whatever that might be. Um, or if you're in different cities, one you're in Portland and they're in Seattle, whatever, then for the next time you're up in Seattle, make a point of touching base physically with those folks. So I think that's one thing. But the other thing is that, um, one on what I think what has been lost in this hybrid and remote work world since the beginning of the pandemic is, I think we've gotten a little lazy
Mm.
about connecting with one another.
Yeah.
And there is, we get zoomed out and we get meetinged out, but sometimes we use that as an excuse to not stay connected.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for leaders, for managers, for people managers, project managers, and even just team member to team member, for us to really have that have a regular cycle of, whether it's every other week or every month, once a month, to just even have a 30-minute or 45-minute connection call, um, where you're not necessarily just focused on the task or the mission, but you're really just focused on connecting. I actually have, and I can share with you, and you can share with your listeners, um, a template for what we call connecting conversations, which is a template that says, okay, so to have this sort of connecting conversation that goes below just, scratch, it isn't just sort of on the surface, but really
Right.
goes below the surface. And it has, a couple dozen kinds of prompts of things that you could ask someone
Oh,
about. So tell me about a work experience recently when you really felt successful,
yeah.
or tell me about a time recently when you were when things were frustrating for you and what was going on, and is there something that I could have done better to help you, and to really have that more
Mm,
meaning type of connecting conversation. And again, it doesn't have to be all the time, or even weekly, or even necessarily every other week. I mean, it could be every 3 to 4 weeks, and at the very least, even just once a quarter, because that might be a
yeah.
whole lot more than anybody's ever doing nowadays, anyway.
Yeah. So
Uh,
you said what's the website for that? Do you have the website?
Um, I will. I'll put it out there, and I'll give you. I'll put a link, and I don't know if you can put it
Okay. We'll put the
in
link
the
in the.
speaker note, because it's going to be a Bitly. It's going to be a Bitly link.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay. Well, we'll put the link in the podcast. So, no, that's great because I think a lot of managers and leaders just need help. The we know the latest survey says that only 30% of managers and leaders have had any kind of training to do the
Oh,
management leadership.
it's a crime.
It
You
absolutely
shouldn't be
is.
doing
And
that to them.
so any tools or tips are always, I think, helpful for folks when they don't have an opportunity to learn some of these necessary skills.
Right. Just one other point on this that I was just
Yeah.
thinking about is, there might be some technical leaders listening to this call, or people who are in more analytical, or legal profession or something, where they might hear us talking about, making a human connection and asking these sort of nice, being this sort of nice, warm, interpersonal style with or having this nice, warm, interpersonal style with your employees, and that you might be thinking, that's not our culture. We're actually very technical people. We're very mission focused, um, and we don't need necessarily to get the warm fuzzy. And I would say, you're absolutely right, and you've got to do what makes sense for your culture, because sometimes what technical people need is not necessarily the emotional handholding or anything, but what they need to know is that the work is being done well, that there's a clear vision and a clear project plan and resources there to do the job, and there's a sense of stability.
Mm,
And it's in those more technical environments where the thing that makes them feel safe and connected is being able to do the work well, and to meet their objectives, and to have that sort of technical excellence. So as leaders, I would just say, you got to do what works for your own culture, but it's not an excuse to not do anything or to stay
sure.
disconnected from people.
Sure. Yeah, and you have a lot of experience with that, given your time, especially with Intel and just a brilliant engineering minds.
Yeah.
So that's good. So let's kind of keep on the leadership topic, but let's flip it to that self help or self understanding of where they are at. And um, you mentioned you got to put the oxygen mask first before you can
Right.
help others. um, I'm encouraged with this increased acceptance of mental health and mental wellness, especially for leaders in the workplace. So how can leaders make sure that they are taking care of themselves and navigating the burnout stress cycle without getting to that very end?
Right. And it is a huge problem. Like, I read an HBR article fairly recently, that where they said that from their research that they saw in managers, that they saw over 50%, about half of managers were burnt out or feeling burnt out.
Wow.
And when you think about it, particularly in hybrid and remote work environments, there's even added pressures, and it's more difficult to manage situations. You're not running into people over the water cooler, if water coolers even exist anymore, but you know what I mean? The
Yeah.
proverbial water cooler, just running
Right.
into people in the hallways or whatever. And it doesn't that and a lot of that doesn't happen now. And, and and I think just with business, the business trend over time is just that sort of added stress and pressure. And I think it's hard for leaders and managers, as much as people love, in some ways, working remotely, and it helps us manage our lives better, and it's in some ways a more organic, natural way to work. But it can be stressful, because you have less direct control or visibility over what's going on. And so, um, and stuff rolls downhill. So if you're a middle manager, a director level, working for a vice president, if that vice president is driving a hard driven organization with no rest for the weary, and really, really driving people hard, then it's going to be hard for you as a director level to manage at those managers of managers, those managers below you. um, so it really is incumbent upon all leaders from the top on down to pay attention to, um, the human side of the equation, and to wellness, and to
Right.
emphasize that, because you know it's business is a marathon, it's not a sprint. As much as
Yeah.
we get sort of hyper focused on next quarter's returns or whatever, um ultimately it really is more of a marathon, and we need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others.
Yeah.
uh, and easier said than done, I think, with the stresses and pressures that leaders face.
Yeah, I think the first time that I ever realized that there is this thing called mental wellness, because through my whole career, I was just I felt like I was naturally resilient. I could take on a lot of activity, a lot of stress, and just plow through it. Um, I was uh, working with an executive, and he had a mental breakdown,
Oh,
and it
geez.
it it was the stress just got to him, and he didn't have a way to for an outlet. And I think it was it he just disappeared, literally just disappeared, and then came into the office like a week later and started just going off on people, just you know
Oh,
um
geez.
and this is where I found, like, oh, so we're finally able to get him to talk with a psychologist, and turns out that he had a mental break, a real mental break. And this was an extreme. He started um uh uh thinking that someone was after him.
Oh, wow.
And I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my gosh," and I sat down and I talked to him, and he was like, "Oh, you got to watch out. Now that you're talking with me, they know that you're talking to me. You better watch out. You better watch your back." And I he believed it. He believed it so forcefully. And I mean, we talked about earlier. Someone walks in the room and you kind of feel, I don't know whether it's their aura or whatever, but you feel that. But he so believed it that when the meeting was done, I walked out on the street and I started looking around. I was like, okay, is anybody following me? And I was like,
Oh my
no,
gosh.
no. But it was so shocking to me, and heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Uh, but of course, back when this happened, mental health was really taboo, and so I'm really happy that things have progressed. But I wonder how many leaders, especially in the executive ranks, go through that, and maybe not to that extreme, but have that burnt out, and it's like, I can't do this anymore.
Right. And that's why, and it's interesting, the connection between good leadership, running companies, running organizations well, profit, not profit, whatever, running them well, and the connection with mental health. Because, um, it's hard enough to have the energy, the endurance, the stamina, um, to stay on top of things when things are run well, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah.
still it's still, they talk about, the corporate athlete. I mean, and it's like an athletic competition,
Yeah.
uh, and and requiring really high levels of performance, and going back to the connection that we were making between the mind and body, and mind, body, spirit. If one of those are not aligned, or if your energy is misaligned, your mental energy, emotional energy, social energy, or spiritual energy are out of alignment, then that's going to detract from those other systems, and then you go down that negative loop, that
Yeah.
negative spiral.
Yeah.
um, and so that's why I think it's important for, again, starting with leadership teams on down, for people to really develop the culture of watching out for one another, and
Mm.
being, and really checking in with people, and understanding that ultimately our business performance and longevity and sustainability relies not just on getting stuff done, but on, acknowledging our humanity and taking
Yeah.
care of one another. And I
Yeah.
think it's happening. You probably saw it. I saw it during the pandemic, that, as hard as the pandemic was, there was this incredible, and it was super hard on people's mental health. There was a drastic increase in mental illness, and,
Yeah.
you um, and a loss of mental well-being, and people acknowledge that more and more. And I think it's become more a part of our overall culture,
Yeah.
is to really, like you said, it's not a taboo topic anymore in most business and organizational contexts.
Yeah.
I would also say that, even generationally speaking, and this is going to be more and more important with our Gen Z colleagues and millennials, is that, they were raised by us, and they and they're that much, I might be painting too broad of a brushstroke here, but I like to think, I was thinking about this the other day, that I think we, learned a lot from being raised the way that we were raised, from those, post World War generation parents,
Yeah.
uh, and children are to be seen and not heard, and all that stuff. And, we I like to think that we, you know, raised our children in a little bit more conscious fashion, and yet it still wasn't perfect. I see that in my own kids. It's like, oh god, sorry. Um, but now, like, my own children, millennials and older Gen Zs, um, are so much more emotionally intelligent than I was at their age.
Oh yeah.
So much more conscious, and so much more, socially aware, and sensitive to, much more inclusive, and the whole DEI connection for them is really part of their core values.
Yeah.
Um, and so it'll be interesting to see generationally, as we boomers age out of the population, and as the millennials, and the Xers move on up, and even Gen X is getting to retirement age now.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm hoping that this greater emotional intelligence will continue to become more and more a part of our culture, and that we will pay much more attention um, to co-rate, to paying attention to one another as people, and not just as, cogs in the wheel or parts of a machine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely some of the more positive aspects that have come out of, COVID and being in lockdown and stuff. It's just that awareness, and it's just going to be healthier for everyone. Um, but I think we still have a long way to go. From this remote versus in person, and how do you have this human connection, which I I think is a fun. We're as humans, we're fundamentally designed to be with people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That we so think of it going back to that autonomic nervous system, that we learn to regulate our emotional systems. We learn to go from that protective fight, flight, or freeze state of being in alarm or protection mode to finding our way back to the optimal zone of safety and connection. We learn that originally as humans, we have evolved to learn that through co-regulation, through the fundamental mother-child bond.
Right.
Now that gets disrupted in some families and in some dysfunctional family situations, but that's kind of how we're wired, is to first be able to find emotional regulation um, through co-regulation by
Right.
regulating with other humans. And so that's where, being paying attention to your own mental hygiene and paying attention to your own mental health um, is so important, not just for you, but for the team and for the organization and for your family and for your community. Because the more that we can take care of ourselves, the more that we'll be in a position to help others find their way back out of fight, flight, freeze and into more optimal functioning. Ultimately, I've seen some arguments that ultimately, um, or let's just paint a broader picture to say that individual resilience by itself does not exist.
Mhm.
That we have evolved as social creatures, and we have our whole nervous systems are tuned as social creatures and for social engagement. It's why
And not
when
social media only.
no, it's in fact it's probably the worst for our mental health is in many ways, but it's why when I look at your face here and you're kind of smiling and we're having this nice and your voice has this prosody and I can see the sort of smile lines around your eyes or whatever, I don't have to think, "Oh, I guess Jeff likes me and I guess I'm safe." My nervous system picks up on that.
Yeah.
And it puts me in a state of 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 social engagement. It puts me in a space of safety and connection. And when I'm in that space of safety and connection, I can problem solve better. I have more creativity, I have more innovation, more collaboration. All of our core functions work so much better when we feel safe and connected. And we pick up on that in our relationships with other people, not by consciously necessarily even talking about it, but just from
Yeah.
feeling the vibe
Yeah.
unconsciously, we pick up on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, if we kind of extend some of that, we've had a lot of companies that have gone through restructuring and layoffs, and I just heard today, another company, friends that I know of that were let go, and um,
Yeah.
and and you know we have a lot of HR professionals that listen to the podcast, so I'd like to take a slightly different view on how can HR professionals help their leaders while promoting resilience, and
Right.
and maybe even optimism for those who remain. Right, so that
Right.
you have the survivor's guilt is a
Right.
big thing for those who stick around.
Right. When we worked at Intel, I had created a whole toolkit. I recognized this problem at some point, or was discussing it with some other organization development professionals about the fact that, oftentimes in reorgs, you know, HR we get so centered on making sure that the Excel spreadsheet has all the right names and none of the wrong names, and that all the different, that we're following the laws and we're not discriminating against people or anything like that. But then, and it's such a huge big deal, and it's so emotionally racking. It's so hard for us emotionally that we get to that end point, and we think it's the end point, but it's really just the beginning in some
Yeah.
ways, or at least the midpoint. And we sort of collapse. I've seen this so many times. And you have seen it, you've experienced yourself. You go through that process and you sort of collapse over the finish line, and then everybody walks around kind of shell shocked
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
number of weeks. And it's so that's why reorganizations, of that impact jobs in the way that they do, are so damaging, at least in the short and medium term, to organizations. And so I created a toolkit, called the quick start toolkit, post change quick start toolkit. And because one of the things that we've observed, that you and I both observed at Intel, is like, you know, if you have an engineer and you give them a problem to solve, and the problem has relevance for them, and they see that this has strategic relevance, um, and that they have agency in helping to solve that problem, it's like a magic healing salve that really heals a lot of wounds. Is that when people feel engaged in solving a problem that's bigger than themselves,
Yeah.
when they can, I'm going to sound like a boomer when I say win one for the Gipper, because somebody's going to go, "What the hell does that mean?
What's a Gipper?
What's a Gipper?" Uh, Look it up. It's a Ronald Reagan movie. But anyway, so um, the when we can feel like we're part of something, and that we actually have some agency, and we have the resources and the time that we need to be successful, um, that's really important. And so what I would suggest to everybody, you don't need my post change quick start toolkit, but what I would say is that it really that during that transition from the old to the new, and in the immediate aftermath and wake, is for us to really pay attention to getting the organization back on track, and making things clear, and not having this lack of clarity or uncertainty linger around, because you'll just tank the organization. And then you'll see what we've often seen in the wake of big changes, is that you'll have some of those really high performers, in particular those folks that can kind of go anywhere to work that they want, um, that there might be a greater propensity for them to leave, and then you're going to lose some of your best players, and it's going to create an even bigger problem. So anyway, for our HR professionals, um, being able to stay and do their best to stay engaged with those leaders throughout the process, and anticipate, okay, the game's not over when we fill out that Excel spreadsheet, and and have, these conversations with people. That's really that's kind of like halfway through the race.
Yeah.
Or even
Yeah.
or that's when it really starts. And then
You
the
know,
other thing I would say is that you know when these reorgs and transformations are super stressful, and it pushes us, all of us, because we're human, it pushes us into those states, are non-optimal states of fight, flight, freeze, when we might get engaged in some of that negative coping strategies of eating or drinking too much, or hiding, or
yeah.
just disappearing. And so that's why it's so important for us to really take care of ourselves during these transitions, to stay engaged. Um, and then we used to say, there's this expression, lead with the heart, follow with the head, that um, when under stress, it can cause us to sort of lose our sense of humanity, and get very digital or very black and
Yeah.
white in our thinking, and very what we think is business focused. But then that can come across as being very inhumane, very,
Callous. Yeah.
very respectful, etc. So this is a time when people are feeling really tender, and really frazzled, and when making the extra effort to show that humanity, and to take care of people, and to even acknowledge, being right up front with saying, let's just have a conversation about how hard this is,
Yeah.
and let's talk about how we can support one another through this, etc., is really super important.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I've certainly done, is pulled my team together, and and let them know it's okay to feel bad for their coworkers. But I always stress that that and encourage that they would look at the situation as, their coworkers weren't so much rejected as redirected to some place that was gonna value what they could bring to the table, or they were redirected to a new opportunity. And I can say 99% of the time when I've followed individuals who had been impacted from their job, that 99% of the time they land into a situation that is better for them, whether it's from a work life perspective, or the role that really will help them come alive. And I point that out, and that always trying to keep the employees focused on, that there's a silver lining. As tough as it feels, something good will come of it.
I think that's often true, but just to not get too overly positive about these things and to acknowledge reality is that when these things are not done well,
Oh, yeah.
if you send a security guard over to the cubicle and you frog march, or you send somebody an email that says bye bye,
Yes, true. That
right?
is.
Then
you know,
then and I know that there were reorgs that we were part of, during the big financial crisis of 2007, 2008, when Intel, um, uh, I think it was the number worldwide for manufacturing employees was like about 1,000, where they just said, we're just not making, there's just not the market for the chips. We can't stop designing and engineering. We got to stop making this stuff because there's the market slowed down, and so they had to lay off. I think as my recollection is around 1,000
yeah.
factory workers. But the factory leader, the person in charge of manufacturing at that time, um, a woman, I forget her name, but they really, she and her leadership team made a really strong effort at helping people as best as they could to find other jobs around the company. And even with those people who couldn't find jobs at the company, making sure that they had good career advisement services, etc. But then there was this other program where they allowed people to do service work, where they went and did accounting for, a social service organization or something, um, and where they paid part of their salary in for 6 months or whatever it was to do that. So I think there are ways of taking care of people that's different than the sort of things that we've been hearing from some of these layoffs, where they sort of send the security guard and frog march you out of there with.
Or just send a text message, don't come into the office, and then shut everything down.
Yeah, um and so that and because that sends a signal to the rest of
Oh,
the
for
organization,
sure.
to the survivors,
Yeah.
that nobody's safe here, and
Yeah.
there's a price to pay.
Obviously, I was talking about, kind of just the normal process of, oh my gosh,
No,
there's.
totally
But
right, because from a resilience perspective, I mean, there is that whole thing of, I mean, the thing about resilience is finding that silver lining. I mean, that's one aspect of resilience, is finding the gift in a problem. I mean,
yeah.
I myself was laid off from Ernst and Young a little over a year ago, and I had long been thinking of starting my own consulting practice, and been even talking with my retirement guys about doing that. And it happened a little bit sooner than what I expected, but in some ways it ended up, in 2020 hindsight, it was like kind of perfect timing. It was like, thank you, universe, for opening up this opportunity, which at the time didn't necessarily feel like a great opportunity. But in hindsight, there's just so much um, benefit that comes, because I wasn't honestly, I was, just not that happy doing what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I think that's probably true for at least some of the folks that lose their positions. There's a good chance that a lot of them were either underutilized or not well utilized, and that's no fun
Yeah.
either. You
Yeah.
know, so it's kind of a double-edged sword at the very least. It cuts
Yeah.
both.
For sure. I mean, we've had just a great conversation so far, and I want to be aware that our time's come to an end. But I had kind of a bonus question that I want to throw out with you. You are a maestro on a harmonica.
Yeah.
Completely different, off topic, but you have your own band in the Portland area. Tell us a little bit about that, and when your next gig is, if people, or not maybe
Oh,
your
that's funny.
next gig is, but where you
I'll
usually
I'll tell
play.
you. Yeah. Right. So I play with a kind of a Americana bluegrass inspired band here in Portland. I met them at a music folk festival down in Eugene, a famous one called the Oregon Country Fair. And we were all camping together, and I heard them playing this band called the Pagan Jug Band. And these guys have been around forever. These guys, a couple of the old guys, have played together for over 30 years. I mean, old guys. They're kind of just slightly older than me, so they're old guys. But and we met and played underneath a super moon, full moon that night, next to a lake. And they're like, "You're in. We're playing next Tuesday. Come join us." And so then for like 7 years, I every Tuesday was Pagan Tuesday, and we'd play at this coffee shop bar in Portland. And then the pandemic shut us down for a couple years,
Yeah.
but then we got back to it, and I'm still playing with them, and we play every third Tuesday of the month at a bar in Portland. That's a really great music venue called the Laurel Thirst Pub
Laurel Thirst Pub. That's a
on
great
Northeast Police
venue.
from like 6 to 8 p.m.
Awesome.
And yeah, we're playing a party, the special party this weekend as well, but that's a private event. But
So Laurel Hurst
yeah,
Pub
no,
on
that's
Thursdays,
fun.
and
Interesting.
Pagan.
And we can edit this out. Just keep going because you're going to do some editing here. But like when I don't know if I told you this. Did I ever tell you, like, so I went to Nizhny back around platform transformation, 2007, 2008. I think that was in 2008. I forget when that
Something like
was.
that. Yeah.
Or 2005. Could have been all the way back in 2005. But I and Jan Gillian we went around the world um, teaching HRBPs, HR business partners, about change management. And that was my bag at that time, in addition to the resilience stuff. And I was in Nizhny, Russia, on the banks of the Volga River, where it's known for their making MiG fighters. And but it's a beautiful old city, kind of
Yeah.
decrepit and worn down like a lot of Russian cities, but beautiful in a way. And one night I was walking home after having dinner and it was my last night in Nizhny, and I had all my harmonicas in my bag because you need one for each key on the scale. You need 12 harmonicas, and um, so I was walking and I heard these folk artists, a couple of guitar players on the street, and I had heard them like a week prior, but they were out of tune with the harmonica. They were in tune with one another, but not in tune like true scales. And so I'm like, I I don't know how to explain this in Russian. It's like I can barely say hi. Give me another pierogi. Um, and and so, but they were in, but I pulled out a harmonica and I go, ooh, they're in tune. And I walked up and um and they immediately it was like, oh, like this guy can play music. And so we start playing, and it was about, it was pretty high, north, pretty far north, and it was getting towards spring, it was getting towards the solstice, and so, or the summer solstice. And so it was late,
Yeah.
and so it's probably about 9 o'clock at night. But I started playing with him at 9. Well, 4 hours later, with a crowd of over 100 people and cases of beer that were brought out, and just incredible stuff happened all night long. And there were a couple of people who spoke a little bit of English who were like asking me, "What is your name?" My name is Bill, and they're like there'd be like after songs, the crowd would chant Bill,
Bill,
Bill, Bill,
Bill, Bill,
and
Bill.
and eventually the Russian cops came along, the Nizhny police came along, and they get out of their cars with there's these huge cartoon police hats and their billy clubs, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. I had these visions of being holed up in a Russian prison cell with brown bread and rats. Um, so I, kind of, and all my gear like just had beer spilled all over it. So I kind of shoved it all in a bag and ran off. Um, but it was, but that the harmonica over the years for international travel, it's been so incredible. It's like my little ambassador buddy. Like I
Yeah.
don't need a translator because I can speak the language of music.
You speak
And
music. Oh, that's
I've
great.
played in all the different countries I've traveled over the years. I always connect with street musicians and get connected that way. It's been pretty remarkable.
No, that's amazing. Well, Bill, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the Leadership Puzzle. Be sure to join us next time, and also like, share, comment, and make sure that you tell all your friends about us. We'll see you next time on the Leadership Puzzle.